everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and this time you made me watch Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. This was a request that came to us from Super Billy, and Brandon is joining me this time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me, man.
Of course.
This is a bit of a tough one to try to deal with. I want to thank Super Billy a lot for the challenge with this movie. This is a thing that I guess saw a couple of previews at the time, and it wasn't on my radar. I didn't think to watch. This came out in 2011. I had heard of the book this is based on. This is based on a novel from the 70s. This is, by the way, an espionage thriller, a really dry, ultra serious, ultra realistic, real worldy espionage thriller about British intelligence in the early to mid 70s. And the reason I had heard of this before is because it was the basis for a parody title for a Star Trek Voyager episode that Brandon and I both like a lot, called Tinker, Tenor, Doctor Spy. And at the beginning of this, I was trying really hard not to accidentally say that title.
Same thing with me, exactly. I always want to say Tinker, Tenor, Soldier, Tenor,
Doctor,
yeah.
Captain, ECH, sure. And the only thing that these two things have in common is that they have a character who is a spy. That's about it. But the Voyager episode was just being cute and parroting that title, and that thing is a comedic episode. This is one of the tougher movies for me to try to get through recently. I spent like half my week trying to get through a watch of this. I watched like half an hour of it one day, and I was too tired, and I was having a hard time focusing on it, and so I watched a little bit more the next day, and I felt like I just was not getting into it and not understanding fully what was happening and what I was looking at. And I invited Brandon over to watch it with me. I started it all over. I've never done this before. I watched half the movie, and then I watched the whole movie.
Yeah.
And I still don't fully understand everything that I'm looking at with this movie. And
I watched 3/4 of the movie with you, but I was exhausted, and I'm trying to follow, and I feel the same way. I need multiple watchings of this movie.
You're saying you saw 3/4 because you fell asleep at the end?
Yes, yeah.
But you saw more than 3/4, though. You started falling asleep at like the
7/8,
10 or 15 minutes to the end. I mean, you
Yeah.
made it through most of it. And then I kept nudging you, trying to wake you up, and then, but yeah. So
and it had nothing to do with the movie itself. I love trying to figure movies out. I was just exhausted.
Sure.
I want to put that out there for sure.
This will be a difficult sign flip, and I guess we can go ahead and do the sign flips real quick and then talk a little bit about just the experience of this movie. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk pretty general about this one like I often do with You Made Me Watch. We're not going to get real into the weeds with this, and I don't want to go super spoilery. With this particular show, Brandon, I go kind of back and forth. It just depends on the material, whether or not I'm doing much in the way of spoilers. But this one, I think, in case folks, this was also not on people's radar and they want to check it out, I don't want to say too much about it.
Sure.
Because it's a thing that I would recommend depending on who you are.
Absolutely.
Right? I want you to do your sign flip first. I'm very curious to see how interpreting this is going to be interesting with this particular movie. So why don't you talk about it for a little bit and flip your sign for it?
Speaking of interpretation, my sign flip is twofold.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I will, if all goes according to plan down the line, I will eventually revisit this movie to try to get a better sense of it, because I did wind up reading the synopsis on a synopsis on the internet about it and got a better idea of what it was I had been watching, because I don't know the source material. So on the first viewing, and this is rare for me that I would have a twofold kind of response for this. On the first viewing, I'm not feeling it because I found it very difficult to follow and understand, but not impossible should I get into it. I have a very strong feeling that this could be a sleeper hit for me, and that upon further viewings, it has a great cast. The cast is wonderful. The cast is doing exactly what they need to do, but they're not telegraphing. They're not telegraphing the and maybe they weren't supposed to be, but the full story does not come through on the first viewing for me.
Yep.
And it was very fascinating because I didn't get the idea until I really reflected on it. I didn't get the idea that a lot of the times, because it's non-linear, a lot of the times we're in a position where something reminds a character of something, and then they have a flashback. They were reminded of the thing, and that was it. So the character starts.
And may I say real quick?
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but in in that instance, this is kind of a narrative device, of course. It actually is technically then not nonlinear. That makes it in-scene flashback.
Yes.
But the problem is it feels nonlinear because sometimes you're not realizing what the trigger was.
Right.
So you're supposed to be in. It happens mostly with Gary Oldman.
Yes.
It doesn't only happen with Gary Oldman, but a lot of the flashbacks happen with him, and you'll very subtly just jump back into a period of time that's informing all of the investigation and conspiracy that we're looking into. And you'll see a character that you know is dead, and you'll be like, "Oh, we're in a flashback
We're
now."
in a flashback,
Okay.
yeah, because you thought that it was just the next scene or the continuation, but it turns out it was back here. Like, oh, now they're back at this. Now they're back at the circus.
Especially
Like,
because we jump from different. And when he says circus, he
that's
means
the code name for British intelligence.
for British intelligence, yeah. Because one of the things that makes this a little bit difficult to follow is the prerequisite that I don't have. Actually, multiple prerequisites. One of which is I'm not from the UK. I haven't spent enough time with the language, and I mean I realize it's English, but I mean I haven't spent enough time with some of the lingo that we don't use here.
Right.
I never know how much of that is just standard British words that we don't use, and how much of it is British intelligence vernacular, and how much of it is stuff from the 70s that nobody uses now, regardless of where you're from. And then the other prerequisite that we don't have, of course, is we don't know a ton about British intelligence and in the 70s.
And I mean, let's face it, our knowledge of British intelligence is 007 and the James Bond movies, and that's a heightened reality.
Yeah.
And very stylized reality.
Yes, and at the same time that that some of it's hard to fully understand just because it feels like characters are speaking in code, and sometimes they are speaking in code.
Yeah. And
yeah, some of it is also the adjustment that you're trying to make because it's also not the format that you're used to and expecting. There's nothing Hollywooded about this movie.
Oh, exactly.
It's not holding your hand at all whatsoever, which is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing and a bad thing with this material, but I'm sorry.
Can I say, since you reminded me,
Yeah.
this movie did draw me in at the very beginning. We start with this idea that what they're doing is, and it's explicitly stated, this is not above board.
Yes.
And then the whole situation
And the opening
goes
contract is clear, right? Like right away, you know what you're getting into. It's a story about it's a spy thriller about British intelligence. There seems to be a mole. We're trying to find the mole.
But before that, even
Yeah.
before we're even introduced to that,
But that's in the first 10 minutes of the movie. That is, I'm just saying,
Yes.
that is the occasion for story. That is the premise.
right? But before that, we get to we get to a situation that goes south,
Right.
And a bystander is killed, and it is shocking.
It's shocking, yeah.
Absolutely, like it's terrible, but in a good way.
And you're right,
Like,
that
it
sucks-
draws me into the
that
movie.
sucks you in right
immediately. I'm
away.
like, holy cow! Did that person just like this? Is oh my goodness.
And it wasn't just the person that gets shot. Then there's another person that gets there's a thing
Yeah.
that gets like burned in my brain that I'll never unsee.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I'll never remember a lot of what little I understand about the overall plot with this, but there are 2 or 3 like gruesome images that are burned in the back of my head that I will never ever forget.
And it's like if you saw that in the real world, you'd just be absolutely shocked. And this was shocking.
There's a dead woman still holding a baby, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's like it's a botched. That they're trying to exchange information. So we start to get information coming through, and as you so expertly stated the other night after we watched it.
well, thanks, man. I
it's
never
like-
do that on camera. It's always off you.
It's like you're a fly on the wall in these situations.
Yep.
And as Hollywood is so prone to doing all the time that they don't do in this movie, they're not giving you, like you said, they're not feeding you all the information. Where a lot of times the viewer has all the information and you're just waiting for the characters to figure it out, you are learning right along with Gary Oldman and the rest of his, his compatriots.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
That's the problem, though, right? Is for my...
but they're not all sharing information across the screen either, so some people get it, some people don't.
Yeah.
And it's kind of disjointed in that way, and that's what led me to having a hard time to understand it. But eventually, after I read the synopsis, I'm like, oh, I see what they were trying to do there. That's actually kind of fascinating. Once I read the synopsis, because after I watched it the first time, I was like, I don't know if I'll ever go back to this. Now I think I will.
And I'm not immediately compelled to.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten everything out of this that I really care to get out of this. Like, I know if I spent more time with it, I would get more of the story and I would appreciate certain things about it. But, like...
Exactly.
The artistry of it and the overarching, like, themes and ideas come out straight away. It's just a thing that, doesn't hold my attention great much of the time.
Sure.
And I don't know if you had that.
I did, but I think now that I know the framework, I could better focus on what's going on and piece this together the way the movie seems to think the characters are piecing this together in the universe. It's in the movie's own universe.
But like you mentioned a minute ago, I do see this as a fly on the wall kind of film, and what I mean by that is it's not a traditional narrative where it's traditional 3-act kind of structure, and it's taking you along on a ride with it. Nearly every shot to me, with a few exceptions, feels like it's like a hidden camera. It's almost
just candid.
Yeah, it's almost like documentary footage that nobody knows is being shot.
For the sake of the spy thriller, I would describe it like Russia has bugs and they're trying to just listen in and piece this together. It's like you're listening through a bug in a spy institution.
That gives it this wonderful believability. Mm-hmm. Like it's really realistic. But what I feel like I'm looking at is real events that are actually happening, mm-hmm. which is what it wants to do. Like, I think what this movie is after, it's absolutely achieving, but it's just not my bag enough to really appreciate it. Like, this movie is not for me, and that's okay. What I'm saying is, so, like, I'm flipping my sign red also, but it's like the best, nicest possible red. Like, it's just not for me.
It's kind of weird to say that because it's not a bad movie at all. And
no, I'd say it's actually an excellent movie.
It's a wonderful movie. It's shot well.
As I always say, which is so obvious, this is about feelings.
Yes. Yes.
If I were like doing, and I'm not going to right now, of course, but if I were doing like a story and character analysis, this probably gets a much higher score than you would expect from a red sign flip.
Yeah.
This is somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5 probably, but it's just too plot driven for my taste. I think it has to be for the kind of thing that it is, and there are really powerful performances in this. These people all feel like real people. The problem is there's not any character study, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be that. I'm just saying that I had a hard time staying interested in it because I don't know a lot about like say Gary Oldman's character Smiley, beyond the things that I have to know to facilitate the plot. Mm-hmm. So Smiley, and again, I'm not even really criticizing it for that. It's just the genre, right? Yeah. This is not narrative fiction. Or narrative fiction. It is narrative fiction. It is a narrative. What I mean is, this is not like real character and story focused.
Right.
And so like the details
there's not a character development. These are fully formed characters who are just doing a thing they do.
Yeah.
And we just don't have that background.
The personal stuff that I know about our main protagonist and really anybody up in this, I keep discovering that the reason we're getting it is because it is like intrinsically related to the major events that are happening.
We only know
so like
as
you wouldn't
much
even know
as
Oldman was up. You wouldn't even know Smiley is married if that wasn't an important plot point.
Right. The lighter is really fascinating, and I won't give anything away about it, but
Yeah.
there's a lighter involved, and it's the impetus for the realization that gets made by the end of the film that wasn't inherently obvious to me until I thought about it and read a synopsis and was like, oh, this is what they did that. They absolutely did what they think they were doing. I just wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
And I will go back to this. Like, I'm going to say it now. Eventually, I will go back to this movie. And this movie was not what I'm used to, and I want to understand it. I want to be there with the characters at the end of the movie.
But yeah, I just feel like, again, it's not interested in being accessible at all. It doesn't have to be for everybody.
Yeah.
It has that in common with other really, really dry movies, like... did you ever see that mid-90s or late 90s movie Quiz Show? Reminds me a little bit of Quiz Show in just that way.
Interesting.
It's also a period piece that is made more or less the way I would expect it to have been made in the period had it actually came out. It feels like then. It feels like one of those movies that's catching up, where it's like, this should have come out in 75, 76, but it just didn't get made. And so it's also really authentic to the mood, atmosphere, and pacing of that period. So,
I love the color scheme of this movie.
Me too.
The very muted kind of browns and, earth tones and things, and it felt very true to what it was portraying.
Yeah, when I said narrative fiction earlier, I was trying to what I was trying to grab onto was literary fiction. I mean, this is not exactly literary. And literary is itself a genre, right? This is not in that genre. Anyway, this reminds me in the filmmaking and the pacing, in particular, of movies like. I mentioned this to you while we were watching it. Movies like The Conversation with Gene Hackman, and it's really in line, and this was another movie that I was interested in the production, like the production quality of it, and the ideas and what happens in it more than the actual experience of watching it. Where, like, I don't know that I would ever want to go back and watch this. I found it really boring. All the President's Men. This has a lot in common with that movie. The Woodward and Bernstein film about their uncovering the Nixon conspiracy. It's a little like that.
I think that provided a movie like this has the subject matter that can keep me into it, if that's the way to say that can keep me focused, kind of. If it's a subject matter I'm interested in, I could get into this genre of type of movie.
Well, what you really have to ask yourself is, would you watch an edited piece of all of these, like, relevant events in real life that are really happening with a, like we said earlier, a hidden camera put in a room that they didn't know about? Because that's essentially what you're looking at. So, and the movie has like very authentically created that experience. I would rather watch the actual narrative adaptation of that. Like, you see what I'm saying? And so it seems to me like if you're intrigued enough to keep watching this movie, maybe you would watch a thing like that. I don't know that I would.
Yeah, I think that's.
You see what I'm saying?
I think that's where we're coming from. These two different sides.
It goes too far in. Again, just for my taste, because I get why it's made this way. It goes too far in the direction of not making things explicit that I need to be explicit in order to get in my protagonist's head and really follow it. It's not about getting in his head, like even though we get flashbacks and we get information that only he would have, I still don't feel like I'm totally with him. I still feel like I'm on his shoulder. Like there's a big difference.
And I get that, and I get the disconnect, but I think that for me, it's because I don't know much about this type of storytelling.
Yeah.
If this was all I ever knew, then I might be way more interested. So I'm willing to give that a shot, provided I find more movies like that. So yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot. And that's not to say that I would end up liking it. I may end up hating it and saying, well, I tried, but...
But also, well, this is where I thought you were going to go with that. I also would... like, I don't need it to give me everything and hold my hand, but I'm just saying that I don't have enough of anything. Like, again, this movie's not enough for me, so uh, like narratively, it's just not my bag in the first place. But then also, I just don't know enough about espionage.
That's true too.
And
Yeah.
so if I had a background in British intelligence and then I sit down and watch this movie, I would have something more to latch onto.
Are you sure you're not actually a British spy right now? Just trying.
Well, if I was, I couldn't tell you about it.
You'd have to kill me,
let's
right?
talk for a few minutes about the story itself, and then a little bit more too about like how it's presented. You mentioned that you very often didn't realize that there was an impetus for the flashbacks.
Yes.
Like I said, I watched half of this and then watched the whole thing in one sitting. I needed Brandon to come over and watch it with me to make me watch it in one sitting because I was having a hard time doing that. And I confess that I didn't realize many of the flashbacks were even supposed to be flashbacks until I looked at it, until I came back to it, part of it a second time. And once I knew that, I realized why we were flashing back when we were. So I knew it wasn't exactly nonlinear.
Well, I wouldn't have gotten that had you not told me. So in a sense, we both helped our own viewings of this movie. Me helped you on the second time, and you helped me on my first time. Like I would have been 100% lost had I not even known that. Because I've been like, well, I thought they weren't with the circus anymore, but here they are with the circus, and like they're retired, they're not retired.
And like you've been alluding to, the whole time, this is a consummate. You must watch this at least twice.
Oh yeah, at least twice,
because there are so many moments with like a really relevant 2 to 3 second shot that is paramount for my understanding of the whole thing that I do not know the significance of while I'm looking at it.
And there's still at least one shot, and I don't want to give it away, but there's still at least one shot that left us utterly confused. We don't know if it's a thing or not a thing. Like, did it just happen, or did he do that?
Yeah.
And even the synopsis that because I mentioned to you that I read the synopsis, and you're like, well, I should probably do that too, just to try to get a better sense. Not even the synopsis was completely sure on that note.
I now have a good sense of the skeleton of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get...
That's a good way to put that.
I get, like
the framework.
Yeah, I get the framework. I get the overall conspiracy. I get what the master manipulation plot was, and I'm pretty sure it all comes together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm pretty sure all of those details ultimately culminate into a thing, and it's
That's why I want to watch it again, because I want to see that happen in the movie.
I don't think it's actually convoluted.
Right.
And while which is wonderful, because I'm sick of those kinds of things. And
yeah.
It's usually dumb movies that have, for the most part, that have really convoluted plots because they're trying to make you think that they're super intelligent and that you're really smart for understanding in the moment when they tell you he was behind it all the time. Oh yeah, he was behind it all the time. See, I can trace
but
it.
they gave that to you. They gave all that information.
And they cheated because retroactively, I'm not talking about anything in particular right now, but there's a lot of these kinds of stories, and I've talked about them ad nauseum.
I mean, it's a formula, right?
Yeah, Spawn, the Maman Spawn story, and 1,000 other things. But very often you like work your way backwards, where you go, all these things that you saw, the bad guy was somehow behind the whole time, even though it makes no sense that he possibly could have been. This is not that. Absolutely. But the problem is on the first viewing, and before I looked at a synopsis, I wasn't even sure whether or not there was actually supposed to be a mole. Because there's this big question throughout the movie if there is a Russian spy in the organization or not. And looking at, and I'm not going to give this away in case somebody wants to watch it now, but looking at a synopsis, I finally realized, oh, that's what's going on. Okay. Could not fully piece all that together while I was watching it.
The way you said that is kind of confusing because was there a mole or a Russian spy? Not necessarily that the mole was a Russian spy.
I meant a spy for the Russians.
Right, yeah.
Which would be the mole.
Right, okay, now I'm
That's
with you.
what the mole would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the way that the movie twists and turns that, and it really turns out that it's an interesting idea how it went down overall. And I just couldn't watch this again.
I just couldn't fully follow it while I was
yeah.
But and again, like, I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but now that I know what it all is, I really don't care to watch it again. Like,
sure.
Now I know what it was, and like I said, it's such a plot driven thing. it was worth seeing, especially for the artistry of it and for a lot of performances. This is like a who's who of British actors, both young and old, in 2011. I imagine one of the reasons Super Billy probably asked me to do this is because of all of the obvious comic book movie alum. And these days, it's kind of obvious to say that it's no longer a novelty to see a movie that has 6 actors that have all been in comic book things, because that's been like superhero movies in MCU especially have been so much of Hollywood's take for so long that those things, and we've got 24 Marvel movies now and Netflix shows Netflix shows and Disney Plus shows. You've got a who's who of Hollywood these days with superhero movies. So there was a time, and 10 years ago when this was made, was a period where that is a novelty, but some of these people had not yet been in superhero movies, right? So like,
and they would go on to do greatness.
If you knew that you were going to be looking at Gordon and Bane a year before you see Gordon and Bane, that might have been a big deal in 2011. This movie came out tomorrow. Nobody's shocked by that.
Benedict wasn't Doctor Strange yet either, right?
Benedict Cumberbatch is not Doctor Strange yet. Yeah, you got Arnim Zola the same year. In fact,
okay, yeah.
now that I'm thinking it,
I didn't realize that was the same year.
This is 2011. Thor and First Avenger both come out that year, and then Avengers comes out the year after that. So yeah, I don't know what month this came out, but I would imagine it was earlier in the year. These kinds of things are usually like February, March kind of movies, unless they come out later in the year for the hope of Oscar bait. This movie did get some Oscar nominations, but I don't think it won any of them. So it got nominated for Best Screenplay and a couple other things. But anyway,
maybe the Academy just didn't understand it.
So like Zola, and I would have to go back and look and see what it was actually up against. But like the guy who played Arnim Zola is one of the main characters in this, and one of the really kind of suspicious, like, what we're wondering whose side he's on the whole movie.
Yeah, that was also a really interesting angle for me.
But he's also somewhat typecast. As soon as I saw him, I was like, well, we're going to be wondering this whole movie if he's a bad guy or not. And we absolutely had that. Who do you think gave the most compelling performance in this film? Like, who were you most intrigued by through this? Because I'm going to give it to Tom Hardy. I think he was spectacular in this.
I do think that he was good, but honestly, I liked that we were kind of following Gary Oldman's Smiley character.
Well, sure.
He was, for me, we're kind of watching his brain work, and that was it's really him that pulls everything together by the end.
Right. He's also the protagonist of the film.
Well, yeah, but I mean, just it was such a different way of storytelling than I'm used to that it's still. I'm going to say he gave me the most compelling. Now, that's not to say that the head of the guy who keeps, why am I drawing a blank? He keeps yelling through the whole thing. The one who sends them to Budapest in the first place. His character was compelling as well, but
sure.
Gary Oldman still holds it for me. And I just, I really like Gary Oldman as an actor and his kind of range of things, from like The Fifth Element on up.
So yeah, that's everything I think I've got to say about it. I was really impressed with it. It's just it was kind of a chore to get through. Mm-hmm. So that's my review. Thanks, and Brandon's review.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot for joining me, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I actually enjoyed talking about this. I kind of more cemented the fact that I do want to revisit this one again.
Anything else you want to make sure and talk about?
I'm here with it right now. I really am, and that's kind of a weird one for me. So,
folks, thanks a lot for watching. I am pretty backed up with the requests right now, but if you'd like to make one, as always, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution. The $15 tier gets you access to that. You can pledge just one time, get your name on the list, and I will try to tackle it for you in as quickly as I can. I usually say 3 to 4 months because that's like how many people we've got on the tier right now and how backed up I am. I do these on average once a week, but I'm also probably going to be taking a hiatus in about 3 months or so. So there will be a gap after that, and then it'll be sometime after that. So if you make a request right now, I can't promise any earlier than half a year from now, just so everybody is on the same page with that. But anyway, thanks a lot. And I take requests for movies and comics. So anyway, if you want to go ahead and get yourself on the list to get your thing talked about at a later date, feel free to do that. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks again to Brandon for joining me and helping me do it.
Thanks for having me, Cap.
And we will see you again real soon with more stuff on Geekvolution. I was Captain Logan, and that was Brandon.
And I was Brandon Graham.
Later, folks.